You ever been stumped on how to start a question with a prospect? I can tell you the first meeting I ever had with a real prospect, it was the CEO of a big company. I got a referral in, I just launched my business, this is back in 2009. Went to meet them, got escorted into their office, I was sitting on the couch, I'm waiting for them, they walk in, and I said, hi, nice to meet you. Hi. Right? I was completely stumped. I was a little bit fresh, a little bit green, wasn't sure exactly what to say. I had no plan. So when it comes to selling, whether you're jumping online like we are right now, or you're going into an office, sometimes you can get stumped on what to say. Even those who've been in sales forever have times where they get stumped based on a comment or question that they get handed during the conversation, but sometimes they can get thrown off at the beginning. I can tell you all sorts of stories of things that have happened that have thrown top sales professionals off their game. So let's talk about how do you set yourself up for success so you don't get stumped during your conversation with prospects. Hi, I'm Shawn Casemore, and I help you learn how to sell more in less time. If that sounds good to you, make sure you click that subscribe button. You'll be notified each and every time I release a new video, which is typically several times a month at least. And you can comment below with any questions or best practices you have that support this topic. All right, let's get going. I'm going to start with this. If you're not sure what to say to a prospect, there's something you can do that requires no effort, no words, nothing at all. And it's this. When you start any interaction with a prospect, you start here. A smile goes a long way when it comes to building rapport. It shows that you're open, you're welcoming, and you're interested in the other person. If I was to come into your meeting, or we were to get on Zoom, and I either have my camera off, right, which you don't want to see, obviously, or I'm looking down at my notes, or I'm looking off at another screen, and like none of that suggests to you I have any interest in this conversation. I'm more wrapped up in my own process, in my own notes, in my own world than I am in you. So obviously I want to focus on you, but smiling shows interest in you. And remember, when it comes to selling, a lot of selling requires building connection, building rapport, having that emotional connection, and smiling is one of the ways you can trigger emotional connections. So I know it sounds overly simple. I get it, but I'm telling you, start smiling more. You're gonna have to say less because people will be interested in talking to you and they might even kick off the conversation. Now let's talk about a few questions you can use as conversation starters with your prospect, okay? Now, I'm gonna say that the conversation about how are you, oh yeah, I noticed a picture of your kids, right? That kind of stuff. Let's set that aside for a minute. There's some rapport building that may happen, but sometimes you don't have time for that. Sometimes the prospect gets online, they're like, yeah, you got 15 minutes, go. And you can't say, oh, I noticed a picture in the background, right? So let's talk about some actual questions that can help you, but most importantly, get that conversation going, okay? First question for you. At the very beginning of the meeting, you say to your prospect or your buyer, appreciate you meeting with me today. Let me ask, your time is valuable. Why did you agree to meet? Right? They're going to tell you, which sets you up for what questions or answers at least you need to provide during that conversation. Second question you can ask your prospect is about their objectives. So you can say, well, so thanks for sharing why you want to meet today. I just want to make sure I'm clear on your objectives for our conversation or for our time. See, objectives are kind of the reasons behind the reasons. So I agreed to meet. They might say, well, because you asked to meet. Okay, well, how do I get below that? How do I understand what they want to talk about? It's the question about their objectives. Or, said differently, okay, let me ask them before we get started, what's important to you as an outcome of our conversation? So there's a different way to say that second question, okay? Third question I want you to ask is near the end of that. So let's say the other time we get stumped is kicking off the conversation at the end of the conversation. We're not sure how to position the next conversation, so here's what I'd like you to do. As you wrap up, you simply say, well, I just want to reconfirm those priorities you identified at the beginning of our meeting and ask, have we answered them all for you today, right? You're just validating that what's important to them, it's something that's important to you because you're bringing it up again, and you get a chance to reconfirm those to make sure you've addressed everything before you move to the next step in your sales process. 3 questions, include them in your sales discussion. You'll never be stumped for what to say to your prospect. Now, when it comes to getting conversations going with your prospect, getting them talking, you have to get them talking, right? And you do that through questions, but what if they're just really quiet? What if they're giving you one-word answers and you're still stuck in, oh my goodness, we've got 55 minutes left and they're done talking, I don't know what to say. You can just broaden the questions a little bit more, right? So you might say something like, well, I did some research on your company and it seems pretty interesting. You've been around for 40 years. Has it been with one owner or has there been one CEO during that entire time? You see, broader questions get people talking. That's what you're trying to do, because once you get somebody talking, you start to build some rapport, and then you can start to inject specific questions about their needs. But we've got to get them talking first, right? So what you can do is broaden your questions a bit. If you find the prospect is not talking, if there's a lot of silence, you've asked your initial questions and there's still silence, broaden the questions, learn more about their company, about their career. That's going to get them talking specifically about themselves, which everybody likes to talk about themselves. And now you're in a position to start to build some rapport and move towards specific questions related to your product or service. So you want to make sure that during this initial conversation, you build some trust and rapport. What that really means is that you're going to make some commitments and you're going to follow up on them. Preferably you start during the meeting. So if you ask those initial questions that I gave you, right, and they give a response like, I want to make sure we cover A, B, and C, what you can do then is make sure you cover A, B, and C off. And then, as I said in the last point, you recapture those, you re-summarize those to make sure you've addressed them. By doing that, you're building trust, right? Because the buyer says, okay, they want to know what's important to me. They summarized it pretty well. They seem to have listened to what I said. That helps build trust. You see, too many salespeople go in focused on their product or their service, not on the buyer. My whole viewpoint is this: you're already an expert in your product or service. There's not much people could say that would throw you off because you know it better than they do. So go in instead focused on the buyer and their needs, and you'll find a way, usually together, to introduce your product or service that becomes more of a partnership than a sale. Now, I gave you one tip already for how to summarize at the end of the conversation, but here's how you leave your initial discussion with the buyer. Even if it's been somewhat short, you say this: you've given me lots to think about today. I'd like to come back and have a follow-on conversation with you. Let's get out our calendars and identify a date that's going to work for you. You see, before you leave that initial meeting, you want to set up the next one. So if it's been a short meeting or they've been somewhat quiet, it's key you get the next meeting set up, right? So you want to make sure you ask that question to ensure the next stage or step actually happens. And if they say, well, you know what, just email me some dates, I'll let you know. I'd say, yeah, I'm happy to. I have a couple minutes now. It looks like we have 2 minutes left in our meeting time. How is, then you start giving them Wednesday between 10 and noon. How is Thursday between 2 and 5? Just give them a couple dates and time ranges. And then as soon as they give that to you, you part ways and you send them that calendar invite immediately, right? You want to get them in the moment. So when you finish that discussion and those questions, you transition to a dialogue into the next stage in your sales process by confirming the actual next meeting. That's how you keep the conversation going. All right, I hope you've enjoyed these tips on how to really overcome that quietness or that initial conversation with your prospects so you can keep that conversation going, learn more about them, and obviously position your product or service for sale. If you'd like more tips and strategies, make sure you visit the other videos on my YouTube channel. They're building, there's lots of them there, so check them out. You can also make sure you subscribe so you get notified each and every time we release a new video. So until next time, talk to you then.